everyone. This is Michelle Sandovich with Flat Out Hope, where we discuss biblical cosmology through the lens of Reformed theology and hopeful eschatology. Flat Earth, sound doctrine, and Christ wins down here. And today we're switching things up. I've been a guest on the RTM podcast a few times. Now I have the privilege to interview Joe Harper of Reformed Truther Ministries and talk about a subject that may be a little unusual for some of you. But before we get to that, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself and your ministry and tell us a little bit about your latest book, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, a crash course in cryptids, monsters, and other wacky stuff.
Hi, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be on your channel. I've been really looking forward to it. I've really been excited for it. Like I said to you off camera, I've been doing a lot of interviews on my channel, but it's really an honor and a lot of fun for me to kind of be in the hot seat, as it were, and answer some questions. Now, that being said, as I said, my name is Joe, and I am the founder of Reformed Truther Ministries. It's a ministry that's existed for around 4 years, and I've been a Christian since around 2011, 2012. I got saved relatively young. And my story, long story short, is I am a particular Baptist. I always say I am standing in the broader Reformed tradition, but I've always loved history and theology, and that's led to some of my passion to some of these more fringe topics that includes Bigfoot. And my ministry is really about presenting truth that is always biblical, always on the foundation of Scripture, but is willing to include topics that some people would say are more controversial, more fringe, including the topic we're going to talk about today. And by the way, I love what you always say about flat earth, sound doctrine. We went down here because I agree with all three of those things. And then the last thing I'll say by way of introduction is my book is Apparently the Monsters Are Real, a crash course in monsters, cryptids, and other wacky stuff. And I chose that title. I'll show the book here for the camera. It's Bigfoot riding a surfboard with sunglasses. And I chose that title and that book cover very intentionally because when you get into the topic of cryptids, it gets into the realm of the paranormal and it gets into some kind of dark subject matter. So the book is a serious analysis of some of these subjects, but I wanted to kind of take the edge off it. I wanted it to have a little bit lighter tone. So I tried to insert a little humor into the book, tried to lighten the mood of the book a little bit. People can debate whether I'm actually funny or not, but at least I tried to be. And the other reason why I wanted to use that title, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, because I do believe that there is very good reason to believe in Sasquatch or some of these other matters too. But I do understand how people initially feel about it. I understand that people may say that's strange, that's weird, that's wacky. So I just thought it was wise to choose a title that acknowledges that and plays into that, because I think when you do that, you're going to set the tone for a better conversation when you talk about some of these topics that include Sasquatch.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Joe, for that introduction. So as you mentioned, that your book is the perfect icebreaker in today's topic. Is Bigfoot real and why does it matter?
Yeah, and there's a Reformed Truther Ministry mug.
Before I jump into the questions, I just want to let you know that I'm a complete skeptic when it comes to giant hairy creatures that roam the forest and scare people. In truth, I've always considered this topic a giant joke, as big as Sasquatch himself, with zero basis in reality. 5 years ago, I might not have even given this topic an ounce of consideration, and I might have seen your fervor on the topic as discrediting everything you teach and believe. However, a lot has changed over the years, particularly in the last few years. There was a time I thought the earth was spherical and that anyone holding to a flat earth was under the sway of a massive psyop intended to make Christians look stupid. I also used to believe postmillennialism was not credible nor found in the Bible. And I once believed, now I might step on your toes here, and that's okay. I'm not trying to cause division, but it's just my journey. I once believed that churches that baptized their infants were sending them to hell, and I cringed at the word Presbyterian. So I was fairly fervent in these issues, even openly speaking the opposite of what I now hold dear. So, as a caveat, I know, as I mentioned, we don't agree on all these things, but we do hold on to the basic tenets of the Reformed faith, the five solas, and the absolute certainty of the Trinity. So, despite my skepticism, and perhaps largely because I respect you, Joe, and I respect you as a person, and I feel you're genuine in the faith, I'm willing to give you the chance to show me that Bigfoot is not just a fairy tale, not just TV fiction, and not just a campfire fable. So I promise to listen with an open mind, consider the evidence, and I'll respect you no matter the conclusions that I draw. If that sounds okay with you, I'll start with my first question, which is not multiple choice, but it is multifaceted.
Yeah. Well, let me just say thank you. You're very kind, and I'll let you ask your question here in just a sec. But let me just say that it's been a journey for me to come to believe in Sasquatch as well. So it really, for me, it has been, oh, apparently, yes, yeah, the Sasquatch is real. But that being said, I think we're ready to get going.
Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of excited to hear what you have to say today. So, here's my first question. Why does this topic matter? I know this question comes up a lot in other contexts, for example, why does flat earth matter? And so I'm curious why you feel it's important to investigate, do field research, and create content about a creature that most people might consider mythical. And more personally, why does this topic matter to you? Are you trying to educate, warn, entertain, or something else?
Yeah, and so as I was thinking about how I wanted to answer this question, I think there's two sides to it. So I want to break it down into the practical side of this and what I'm going to call the kind of the deeper spiritual side to it. And for most people, practically, if they aren't seeing Sasquatch, they aren't experiencing it, it would be very easy to say it doesn't really matter at all. And I can understand that. I can sympathize with that. But one of the things I'll start by saying is that there's a lot of people who do claim, whether you believe them or not, to experience this thing in the woods and even claim to have very traumatic experiences with this creature. And I personally do believe that many of these people are telling the truth. Now, in the world of Bigfoot, if you want to call it that, yes, there are people who can make things up or exaggerate or aggrandize things, try to make money off of it, just like in any other area of the world. We know that people like to lie and make things up, but there's literally thousands of people in the United States or in Canada who claim to see this thing. And I've talked to some of them personally. And for those people who have had those type of experiences, and some of them very frightening experiences, like it's for them, it's very relevant. It's something that's important, and it's something that I think that sometimes people even need help dealing with those type of topics. So that would be the pragmatic side of the question. But there's a deeper side of this question, and this gets into why I do this. Is I do believe that Bigfoot is there's a supernatural or a paranormal component to Sasquatch. That's why we don't have Sasquatch in the zoos. I think that if he was just an animal, we would have found it long ago, just as we have with many other type of creatures. And many people who have these type of experiences, there's all sorts of strange things that are associated with it. Sometimes similar to even demonic experiences. It can be kind of dark. And I think that the reality that this thing may have a supernatural component, as strange as that may sound to some people, also makes it more relevant, because when you understand it, that is true, assuming you're following my line of thinking, it plays into the bigger picture of, wow, the supernatural is real. We're living in a spiritual world. It helps to demolish that secular Darwinian evolutionary worldview that we live in and are saturated with, which leads to, in my opinion, to existentialism and nihilism. Life has no point. And I think that when you are able to show people that the supernatural is real and ultimately we're living in this cosmic battleground between good and evil, it really helps people to see what life is really about. So that's really the big picture. So my ministry, my purpose, there's really 3 points to it why I do this research. One is to bring awareness and to educate, and that's intended primarily for people who may not understand it or may be open to it, people who don't believe it. But then my second purpose is to affirm the experiences of people who are claiming to see this. So that's the other side of it. And that really puts me in a really unique position, because it allows me to talk about the Bible and share the gospel with people who are sometimes New Agers or secular. And because of the fact that I can say, I affirm your experience, maybe not necessarily everything about your worldview, but I believe that what you're saying is probably true. It already has, and it continues to open up a lot of great conversations for me. So that's the second part of what I do. And then the third part is I always use the words awareness, affirmation, and association. I'm always challenging people. Think of this in terms of a biblical worldview, or in other words, see that it's associated with a biblical worldview. So that's really the strategy of my ministry in a nutshell. It's covering a niche topic, but it's for that sort of purpose.
Oh, well, that's really helpful to understand, and it makes sense why it would be important. And I can give you credit for helping to bring people out of darkness. I've shared my experience with you before with demonic encounters, and so I know that they're real. And if I was coming from a background of New Age or something else and had that experience and didn't have that anchor of the gospel and Christ to go to, I would be really thankful if somebody could help me in that way. So I think that's great, Joe. So
No, thank you.
all right. So the second question, what or who is Bigfoot? Are Sasquatch and Bigfoot the same being? Does it go by any other names? I know you're going to get into the evidence a bit later, but now just tell us who or what it is. Are there more than one? Does it procreate? Is it dangerous?
Okay. So there's a few questions there. So let me just break them down one at a time. I'll start with the name. Bigfoot and Sasquatch are both names for the same thing. Bigfoot, to the best of my knowledge, is what I would call the popular name. It's the name that pervades in our popular culture. And that name has been used more recently. It really starts around the 1950s. So, really, from the 20th century on, it's been referred to by this name of Bigfoot. Now, the name Sasquatch is the term that I like a little bit better, even though I'm perfectly content with the term Bigfoot. I use them both when I talk in my videos and in my book when I write about it. But Sasquatch is a term that was used by the Native Americans of the Pacific Southwest. I hope I'm pronouncing the name of this group of tribes correctly, the Salish people. And that they believed, as many Native American tribes did for centuries, that this creature exists. And when you get into the beliefs of the Native Americans, there's literally dozens, if not hundreds, of different names for this creature that you can refer to. Now, I won't go through a long list of them. These are things that you can either read about on your own or look up on the internet. Let me give one other example from the Ojibwe people of the Great Lakes region that includes Minnesota, and this one is relevant to me because I'm from Minnesota. They literally called it the Sabe, and at their belief system, that it was so prevalent, they have what are called the 7 grandfather teachings. They have these 7 virtues such as wisdom or honesty or courage, and they associate that with these different animals or creatures. And the one for honesty is Sasquatch, or as they called it, the Sabe, which is really interesting. It shows how strongly it was a part of their worldview. So that really covers the name part of this. Now, what is Sasquatch? That's a question where once again I want to break it down into 2 parts, because there's the simple answer to this and then the deeper answer to this. And when you get into more detail of trying to identify specifically what this is, I do have to admit, you do get into a realm where there is conjecture. I mean, we can say that I believe this thing exists. I think there's a lot of details about this that I can give. But as I get into the different theories of what people think, I can't say that all of this is 100% proven. And that's due to the nature of this being really what I think, a creature that is a real creature, but has a supernatural component to it. So, I mean, the simple answer is that it's a bipedal creature. And as the name suggests, it does have big feet. It is hairy. It's usually extremely smelly, according to people who have claimed to see the creature. People who have claimed to experience, they'll say it really smells. There'll be like a garbage or a really, without going into too much grotesque detail, just not a pleasant experience to smell this thing. It's supposed to be larger than humans, 8 to 8 feet or more. One man who I talked to who claimed to have seen it said that the creature he saw was 8 to 9 feet tall. And it also, in terms of its characteristic, it has a conical shaped head. And that's going to get I'll get into that more later, but that particular detail of its appearance, in my opinion, is relevant. And there are supposed to be male and female Sasquatches. So they do procreate. They do have kids. They seem to operate in some type of a clan structure. And they really do have an agenda to avoid humans at all costs, that they don't want to be spotted by humans. These things exist in very remote regions for the most part, in the woods, in the areas, and they seem to be content to want to live a more primitive existence. They're very intelligent. Some people, and this is where I really get into the deeper side of this of, well, what specifically is it? And there's different theories that go along with the research and the worldview of different people. Some people have tried to speculate that it's just a dumb ape, it's just an animal, maybe more intelligent than a gorilla, but less so than a human. Some people have gone down the route of saying that it's some type of an adjacent hominid, such as a Gigantopithecus. And even as you hear that terminology, that may sound a little bit more Darwinian. I don't subscribe to that theory, but a lot of credible academics, or at least a couple credible academics who are PhDs, have put forward that theory about Sasquatch. Some Christians have claimed that it's just a demon. And
can I interrupt
yep,
you just a minute?
absolutely.
You used a word that I'm not familiar with when you were referring to Darwinian evolution. I'm assuming you meant like a breed between the monkey and the human.
Yeah, when I say adjacent hominids, such as a Gigantopithecus, that is what some people who are basically not young Earth creationists have claimed, that it would be something in between an ape and a human. Some people have tried to say, some people have put forward the theory that it's somewhere in between that on the evolutionary tree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep. And some theories put forward by Christians because of the paranormal aspect of this is that maybe it's just a demon or a fallen angel. That's a theory that's been put forth. The theory that I at this point subscribe to, which I think makes the most sense, as crazy as it may sound, is I think it is some type of a descendant or a variation of the giants, or the term Nephilim of the Bible, which is a whole other rabbit trail. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But I think the big thing I want to emphasize at this point with this question is, I want to say that I believe this is what is called a preternatural creature. Now, those who don't know what a preternatural creature is that something that is both natural, it is physical, it exists in our world, but is also, once again, it is supernatural. And some people have even put forward the claim, once again, as crazy as it sounds, it may come in and out of our existence. When you read books on demonology, that will be referred to as preternatural, because demons are referred to, they're spirits. We often don't see them, but they can harm humans. They can interact with humans in negative ways. People who are possessed by demons, they have all sorts of physical things literally affect them or their bodies or their minds. So yes, so Sasquatch is physical. I believe it eats. I believe it, how do I put this delicately? It leaves, it poops. It uses the Bigfoot bathroom. It can touch humans. It can harm humans, but it's also, once again, both physical and supernatural. So therefore, it's the best way to describe it simply is a preternatural creature. Now, the question you asked about, is it dangerous or not? Generally speaking, I would say yes, it is, or at the very least, it has potential to be. Now, people have had experiences with Bigfoot where they would claim it was a neutral experience, or even at times a benevolent experience. But other people have had very dangerous experiences with this creature. The Native Americans even tell stories, kind of these campfire stories, where they would scare their kids, where it will grab women or children, things along those lines. And as stories often go, they really believe that they were rooted in truth, even though those are those type of stories. Now, how do you explain that? It's the same way with humans. You get very different types of humans. There's different types of Sasquatches. There's subspecies and varieties. And it seems that some are just more inclined to be dangerous than others. So there's a lot more I could say upon that. But yes, even though not every experience that people have is necessarily dangerous, I think in general, the safe assumption is, yes, they are always dangerous, or at the very least have the potential to be.
Before I get to the next question, I just have a follow-up question for you. Can you
Yeah.
share one story of a, a danger that happened, an account of something that happened that harmed a human, or whether it's a story from the early Americans or from someone else?
Well, there's a number of stories. I think there's one person who has researched Sasquatch. This is not a Native American one, a more recent one. There's an individual by the name of Ken Walker, and he's actually a taxidermist in Canada, and he's actually won awards, and he did a whole documentary called Big Fur, where he did, if people know a taxidermy, they're like these very intricate models of various creatures. And because he has always believed in Sasquatch and has researched Sasquatch similar to what I do, he did a taxidermy of a full-on Sasquatch, and they made a whole documentary about it. So you can look up Ken Walker. Well, because of the fact that he does this type of work, he kind of jokingly referred to himself as the hairdressers of hunters. So in other words, you know how people will go into the hair salons and they'll tell their stories of life, even local rumors and gossip and stories and all of those type of things. Well, that's the type of relationship he has had with people in the woods. So he has said not just that one hunter, but multiple hunters have been charged or attacked by Sasquatch, and they've even had to fire their weapons at it and essentially turn it away. There are hunters who have claimed to kill Sasquatch in the woods, and that goes down the whole role of, is there a cover up of this creature similar to other cover ups? I won't go too far into that, but there are many stories. Even if you just go through podcast material or start reading the literature on this, of hunters who have claimed to be attacked by Sasquatch.
Thank you. That's interesting. So you are definitely gaining some credibility on this topic in my mind.
Well, that's good.
But I would like you to just, I know you've touched on this several times, but I would like to hear you explain more and more, or more about the supernatural aspect of Bigfoot.
Yes. So I believe this is the part where I want to get into. I believe that Sasquatch is a, what I've said, a descendant or a variation of the giants or the Nephilim of scripture. And I know that's a big topic in of itself. That could be a whole podcast. I also understand that there is a lot of reform people who don't like what is called the supernatural view of Genesis 6. That's the view I subscribe to. It's very central to my beliefs with these type of issues. And so it's really impossible for me not to mention it or not touch upon it. And basically, there's a book here I have, and this will get into the supernatural part of it, called Truth Denied. This was put out by a Christian researcher named Scott Carpenter. And his research started from the place of believing that it was some type of a relatively dumb ape. And I say less intelligent than humans, but maybe more intelligent than a gorilla. And that's where he started. And he researched this for many years. And I've interviewed his son, Travis Carpenter, by the way, and he went through this in a lot of detail on my channel. But through various means, they collected DNA, and they discovered that through hair samples, through scat, that's once again Bigfoot poop, other means, that they were able to get samples, as they claim, and I do believe they're credible, and they have found that there's a strand of human DNA in this creature, which is mind bending. Now, how does that connect to the Nephilim? Well, if you believe this, if you take the supernatural view of Genesis 6, a Nephilim or a giant would be a mix between a human and an angel. And that's where you would get a more, I guess, a more logical or scientific explanation of the supernatural side of this. And the only other thing I'll say about the Nephilim topic at this point, before I get into the supernatural components, is that the first 300 years of church history, that was the established view. And the main text on that is Genesis 6:4, where it says that there were, I'm paraphrasing it, there were giants in the days of Noah and also after that, when the sons of God, that's the B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew, came amongst the daughters of men. They took the daughters of men as wives and they created offspring. Now, what I'm trying to get at is that the Sasquatch, it seems to have when you get into the specifics of DNA, it seems to be very similar to what we would assume with the DNA of what was going on in the pre-flood world and also the post-flood world. Giants in the Bible also pop up prominently in Canaan. And that is where Joshua and Caleb, you read the verses that they found giants in the land of Canaan. That's a big reason why they were scared to invade, and the people grumbled about that. And then it took a whole generation for them to go into Canaan because they found giants. And then we also find giants further in biblical history with King David's time, where he faced Goliath and his brothers. There's a lot of different names for these giants in scripture, such as the Rephaim or the Zamzummim. There's these different names. The theory that I hold to at this point loosely is that the giants, after the flood, however that happened, they were there again, and they were in Canaan. The Israelites came in over many generations. We read this through the book of Judges era up to King David. And essentially the ones that didn't get killed off by the Israelites scattered to other parts of the world. So that's why we find evidence for giants in other parts of the world. And it's a whole other topic. My research really didn't necessarily start as much with Sasquatch as with giant mounds, even though I've come to believe there's connections between the two. There are giant mounds located all over the United States, including the state of Minnesota. That's what piqued my interest, because where I live locally is very close to some of these hotbed sites. And there have been skeletons that are 8 to 12 feet tall. Those are the most credible numbers, are 8 to 12 feet tall. So the supernatural part of this, because I believe it may potentially be, this is still conjecture, but informed conjecture, that this may be a descendant of the Nephilim, and that DNA strand may have continued, or either a descendant or a variation. That helps to explain why there may be a supernatural component to this. I mentioned the conical heads before, that giants or Nephilim always are reported to have conical heads. And there's very interesting things where conical heads or elongated skulls have been found in various parts of the world. The big one would be the Paracas skulls in Peru. And researchers such as Brian Forrester or L.A. Marzulli have done DNA research on those skulls and have found that there is non-human DNA in those skulls. And some of those skulls are freakishly large. The secular archaeological establishment tries to dismiss those due to, they'll say that was just the natives performing cranial headboarding. And you say, well, how does that make sense? Now, cranial headboarding is something that does go on in cultures around the world. That's not a completely invalid response. But the thing is, with some of these really freakishly large ones, well, essentially what it comes down to is you can manipulate the mass that is there with your head, but you can't enlarge or expand it. You can't add to it. So I do believe that the natives in places like Peru, kind of in veneration to what they believe were the gods, would practice this. But some of these specific skulls where they have found non-human DNA, I think that's tying into the mysteries of the paradigm of the pre-flood world. So not ancient aliens, it's not UFOs, it's Nephilim related. Genesis 6, pre-flood. That's a whole other rabbit hole, like I said.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yep, absolutely.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Were you saying that you think the reason that the humans tried to make the conical heads was because they were worshiping these creatures with the conical heads? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, essentially, yes. So for example, I think that when you read this in reference to Peru, there have been, when you read the accounts of the conquistadors specifically, because the Catholic Church, they went into Peru, they found the existing Incan Empire, and they found their own mummies of giants that had elongated skulls. And a lot of this history has been covered up by the Catholic Church, the Vatican, because these were Catholic conquistadors that went into this. But some of the chronicles of this history still exist. And I've talked about that in both this book, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, and my other book, The Hidden Enemies, which is more of a world history. So basically, these giants, because they're descendants of these fallen angels, assuming you're following my reasoning, they always want to be venerated as false gods. They're essentially part of the greater rebellion of Satan. And because those giants, they had supernatural abilities in their own right, things like telekinesis, there's usually some type of a telepathic element to all of this, amongst other things. they are always usurping veneration or worship. And what I'm saying specifically in reference to that the Incas of Peru, they saw beings like giants who had non-human DNA, and those are the specific skulls I was referring to, but they would emulate the practice because they wanted to be like the gods. They wanted to be like, and this ties into the paradigm of idolatry in general. Behind idols are always real entities that are not gods. Even the Bible will sometimes refer to them as spiritual beings, but there's only one God. We're monotheists, but these fallen angels will use whatever supernatural power they have to deceive these people to worship them as angels. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you.
As gods. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a follow-up question on that. It's very interesting. And because you mentioned earlier that these creatures try to hide, they don't want to be seen by humans. And I'm just wondering if that's because of the influence of Christ that still exists in our world. And I'm wondering if society were to continue to degenerate, would these creatures try to come and seek worship again?
There's a lot of theories on that. And what I can say right now is that with Sasquatch and with cryptids in general, I do believe they have an aversion to Christ or Christianity. Even with my own experiences hiking the woods, I haven't had a full on sighting. I've had a few strange things happen to me, and prayer has shut that down. So I'm 100% convinced, even on my own personal experiences, that spiritual warfare ties into all of this. In specific reference to your question about would an increase in depravity lead to them wanting to come back and be venerated, I believe the answer is yes. And right now, whether it's with Sasquatch or with other cryptids, because there are other cryptids, the amount of sightings is going through the roof. We could talk about the UFO phenomenon, which I believe has a demonic component. I don't believe in extraterrestrials or outer space. That's exploding as well. And what I believe is going on right now is that depravity and idolatry and new age spirituality, all of that is going up, 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 up in our world. The practice of occultism and witchcraft is going up, up, up. And I think the cryptid sightings going up is correlated to that. That's what I personally believe. Now, the question I don't know is how long is the Lord going to let that go on? That kind of gets into a more of an eschatology question. I don't know that, but I do believe that the 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 more humanity is playing with the spiritual fire of occultism or witchcraft or not being protected by the power and authority of Jesus Christ, the more these type of sightings happen.
Interesting. Did you have any more to share on the supernatural aspect?
Yeah. The last thing I want to cover is just giving kind of a listing of the set abilities, because I haven't really said how it's supernatural. I've just given the why. Now, there's a lot of things when you go into the world of Bigfoot, what people need to understand, there's two camps with this, as I've already said. There's the people who insist it's just an animal, just a physical being. They don't want to admit the supernatural side. And then there's the other people who have had experiences who insist that there's a supernatural component. One of the big abilities that people claim this creature has is what's called mind speak, where people will claim to like hear audible voices from this creature in their head. You see the paranormal connection to that, very similar to how people would experience things with spirits. And I do believe Christian prayer will shut that down, by the way. And people have also claimed that it can cloak, which sounds very strange. I know it does. Please understand, I get it. But really, I do believe that there's a lot of, I don't understand how this works, but people have claimed that this being can essentially be an interdimensional being. And what I mean by that is that to whatever extent, I don't claim to know perfectly how this works, that it can come in and out of our reality. Scott Carpenter, the Christian researcher I mentioned before, he claimed to have seen portals while while being around this creature, and even he was astonished by that. But I believe he's very credible, especially because he was doing this as a Christian. So there's all sorts of strange stuff that comes up. People who research this, they've claimed to see spiritual orbs or spirits around this thing. I could give a lot of things, but if all you have to do, if you listen to enough hours of Bigfoot podcast, eventually you're going to come to what I call that's the wacky stuff. It's the strange stuff. How can this thing be talking without talking? How can this thing be there one moment and not be there the next? How is there spiritual activity around this creature? That's why I went to such lengths to explain the Nephilim stuff, because that's the best explanation we have at this point. So there's a lot more I could said, but that at least gives people an introduction to some of these weird supernatural components of Bigfoot that you would actually experience if you're out in the woods.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to say, as far as the view on Genesis 6, I most of my life have held the what is now called the traditional view, even though it's not the traditional view. As you pointed out, for the first 300 years of church history, the church fathers thought it was supernatural beings from the sons of God, and I am leaning more towards that view now. Not 100% convinced, but pretty close. And I think
that's
go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of my favorite topics. And when you look at some of the people who have denied that view, you get Augustine, Chrysostom, and then moving forward, you get Luther and Calvin. And as Reformed people, we would admit those are big names. Those are people we would respect, people who we would say are credible. But when you go to the church fathers before them, it's pretty much to a man that they were talking about these giants and these angels. There's a great book on that by the Reformed Baptist pastor Douglas Van Dorn called Giant Sons of the Gods. I would really recommend that book because I think he's done an irrefutable job of laying out that view for the Nephilim. And then last thing I'll say is that if I didn't really have this paradigm of Genesis 6, I don't know if I would have gotten to the Sasquatch research. So I really do believe that is crucial for really being able to get into this topic as a Christian.
And it makes sense that the early church would teach it because that's what the ancient Hebrews held to as well. That was their view. And I think what's kind of sealed the deal for me, except for that 1%, is in Job. The only other time that I can see that the sons of God are talked about is in Job. And those are definitely supernatural beings. And so why would Genesis 6 use that same? And from what I understand, the story of Job predates the writing of the book of Genesis. And so likely Moses was drawing on that when he wrote that account. So
yeah, I think
my
so.
50 cents.
The term B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew, as you said, is used every single time. In the Old Testament, every other reference we can clearly see without too much struggle that it's referring to angels. So as you said, if you take that to be men for Genesis 6, you have an indiscretion or inconsistency there. Now, I do know that we see the term sons of God referring to Christians in the New Testament, and that gets into the theology of adoption, and there's reasons why we see that type of language being used for us in the New Testament context. There's a lot more I could say about that, but those ideas aren't mutually exclusive to each other. But yeah, the term in the Hebrew, B'nai Elohim, is always referring to angels.
Very interesting. So I almost feel like I don't have to ask you this next question because I feel like you have provided some strong evidence already, but I'm sure you have some more that you want to share. So would you provide your strongest evidence, the best that you have, to convince me and the listeners that Sasquatch is real?
Yes. Now, I know that what most people are going to think of is the Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967. And I just want to say my case does not rest upon that film in any way. I have my opinions with it. I want to share those last after giving all of the rest of my evidence. But really, I think there's a lot of other areas that are very good to go to before even getting into that at all. If the Patterson-Gimlin film is a hoax, I don't necessarily think it is, but my case doesn't live or rest on that at all. I've already made mention of the Native Americans. I don't need to go into more detail of that. I've already referenced that the anecdotal evidence, the experiences of people. But let me say at this point, already having probably lost a few people going down the wacky trails of the supernatural, let me say at this point, there are some very credible academics, especially in the field of anthropology, who have done a lot of really good research on this topic and have been willing to risk their careers to talk about it. The 20th century anthropologist by the name of Grover Krantz, you can look up his name and credentials on the internet, did a lot of work on Sasquatch and was willing to come out and say that he believed its existence is credible. And really, he was shunned and socially isolated and kind of mocked by his academic peers because of it, because it has this wacky conspiracy theory element to this topic. But he wrote some very good things on this. And then the big one that some people will know the name of Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and he has written a book. I have it here. Let me show it for the camera. I think that's important. He wrote a book called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. He wouldn't probably go into the supernatural stuff as much as I have. He really wanted to come at it from a more analytical, logical perspective. And he always kind of said, I think somewhat tongue in cheek, I don't believe in Bigfoot. I believe in the evidence or the data. But he did believe that the data led people to specifically, the data led that it should lead to a belief in Bigfoot. And Meldrum is interesting because of the fact that he really specialized in Bigfoot footprints, which I think is another credible line of evidence, because there have been many footprints found by many different people in the woods that, as the name would suggest, are very big. They're big feet. And unless you believe all of those footprints are a hoax, you really have to explain, well, what made them? And that's something that I would say, as much as sightings, is a very good line of evidence. And if you look him up, he did molds and casts based on footprints he found. He talked to people. He did a lot of analytical research on that. And that one is very important. I won't dwell too long on the anecdotal evidence. I've already said it, but let me just say it one more time for emphasis, that I was trying to look up the numbers on how many people have seen it. Due to the nature of the subject, it's hard to get exact estimates. But even a simple Google search will show that thousands, if not tens of thousands, I think those are safe numbers, have claimed to see it both in the United States and in Canada. And if you go on to, there's a really helpful website, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and they have a state by state sightings registry, and even it goes into counties. I've personally found that very helpful. I've even used that registry to help pick locations to go to for my research. And if you just look at that, understanding that people can lie and exaggerate, and you look at all of those sightings, I just ask myself the question, is everybody lying? Is everybody making it up? I don't believe that. Now, people can have legitimate experiences and misinterpret what they are. You could have a spiritual experience. You could have something that's demonic. People think demons are aliens. There's all sorts of ways you can misinterpret things. But I think there's just far too many people seeing this thing for the phenomenon not to be real. Now, that leads to many necessary follow-up questions of getting into the specifics of what that is, as I've already done a little bit. But the sightings and the anecdotal evidence is very strong, very compelling. Now, there is also been what I believe is credible audio recorded, not a ton. The one I will mention specifically is what is called the Sierra Sounds, put out by Al Berry and Ron Moorhead. Those names will be familiar to those who have researched Sasquatch. And they put out what is called the Sierra Sounds. I won't even begin to try to imitate it because I will simply butcher it, but it's a very high intensity, I guess a howl of some type would be the best word I can use. They claim that they got this footage from Sasquatch from out in the field. I don't know 100%, but I do believe they're credible. I don't believe they're lying. I think that's something that should be looked into. There's other ones I have found on the internet that may or not be credible. I'm not going to share specifics at this point. And then finally, I'm getting into video footage. I've talked about academics, footprints, sightings, audio. Now, I'll talk about the Patterson Gimlin film in just a second, but there are some other ones that are credible. There's a man by the name of Paul Freeman, and he has video footage from 1994. You can find this on on YouTube, this footage. It's been put there. And I learned about this from reading Meldrum's book, which I just showed. And he believed it was credible, which led me to look into it, because I was really of the belief that other than the Patterson Gimlin film, there really isn't really any video or not much anyway. But as you look at that footage, I think it is indeed credible. It would show a sighting. People will deny it, obviously, the skeptics, whatever else. People can look at that and make their own judgment, but I at least submit that as something to look into. And then I want to talk, I've already mentioned Scott Carpenter. He's someone who I've relied upon in my own research, and he has a few videos that are interesting. His best footage, he captured what is essentially a white-furred Sasquatch creature, whatever that is. And Scott Carpenter was very instrumental in, he developed a tactic called the backpack camera. And it's not really revolutionary to put a camera on your backpack, but what he did specifically was he put it on his backpack facing backwards, because he realized if you're going to look for Bigfoot, it's not necessarily going to go out right in front of you and wave at you. And he realized it would probably be wise to have eyes looking backward all the time, so to speak. And he captured this. Now, when you watch the video, it's a little bit grainy. It's not Disney level cinematic quality per se, but when you see it, it's there on the film. And I do believe it's credible, because I believe he's credible. And I think that those are all things that I can submit. Okay, last thing I'll say is I think everybody probably wants to hear what I think about the Patterson Gimlin film. And the Patterson Gimlin film is, when you get into this topic, it's the most well-known footage. If you believe it's credible, it's footage. If not, it's a very, very well done deception. And it was put out, I mean, according to the reports of Patterson and Gimlin, Robert Patterson, Bob Gimlin, October 20th, 1967, which, by the way, is Sasquatch Awareness Day. And according to them, they filmed it in the California redwoods of Northern California. And you see this footage of this supposed creature, if you believe it's real, walking across the screen. Now, there's a man who came along later by the name of Bob Hieronymus, who claims that it is a hoax and that he was, in fact, the man in a monkey suit. And the controversy and the debate continues. There's a lot of interesting things about that footage. Now, part of the thing I'll say, if that is a hoax, it would be a very convincing one, because when you watch that creature walk across that screen, that creature has muscles. It's noticeable that it has muscles, and it's not if it's a costume, it would have to be really tightly hugging the body, because if you wear a costume, it can be baggy, and it's very different from, the skin of a creature. I also take notice that creature has a conical head. And also, the thing I can point out is that the walk of that creature is different to the walk of human beings, in the sense that that creature walks with one foot directly in front of the other in a way that's different than humans naturally walk. Now, that could be fake, that could be imitated, but you'd probably have to do that conscientiously. Now, Bob Gimlin, he's claimed, or not Gimlin, Hieronymus, he's shown that he can imitate that walk. It wouldn't be impossible to do that, but you'd probably have to be conscientious of it. I'll let people make their own judgments. Like I said, my case doesn't rise or fall with the Patterson Gimlin. I do think there's reason to believe it may be credible, but when I did the same thing when I wrote my book, I kind of talked about this last for that reason, because I know there's controversy surrounding it, and I would really prefer people to look at some of the other evidence first. But there's a lot there. And I mean, you got to think about it in the sense that, okay, 1967, this is before we now have iPhones and all this technology. We have AI. It's very easy to fake things in our day and age, which is something that I'm aware of even as I do research. You got to be very careful. Now, if they did that, let's just run with this idea that they faked it for a second. This is in the age where they were making the original Planet of the Apes movie, and special effects were good, but they were only as good as they could be. And I'm like, okay, so did three guys get a monkey suit from a costume, or make one, strap it to the body very, very intentionally in a way that's convincing, and then fake it with a home camera, and then convince people for really a generation that it may be real? Maybe they did, maybe I didn't. But I'll just say, in its own way, it's a grandiose claim in its own right. So yeah, it's something to think about.
Okay, very interesting. So, you mentioned quite a few evidences here. I'm just wondering if you could send me some links to, say, the registry for the Bigfoot sightings and the video footage from 1994,
Yep.
and also the Scott Carpenter white fur video, and then also the Patterson Gimlin video. If you could send me links to those, I'll put them in the show notes. So, okay,
Absolutely.
was that, does that conclude the evidence that you wanted to share today?
Yep, that's the best I got. So
Okay,
take it or
well,
leave it.
that's great. Thank you. So, assuming this is the final question, assuming that everything you've shared today is true, and of course, you even within that realm, you're admitting that there's skepticism that's required, and I appreciate that. But how, if all, should this affect the way we live out our Christian life? Is there anything practical, theological, or spiritual we ought to do to combat, warn, or deal with Sasquatch, whether we encounter one or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's an important one. It's one that, even as I have some answers in my own mind, I'm continuing to think through as I'm doing what I'm doing. The big takeaway, the practical takeaway, is what I said earlier, that if, let's just say for the sake of argument that I'm seeing this correctly, and that this is a spiritual creature that exists, it may be tied into this paradigm of the Nephilim. Let's just say all that's true. Well, what that should really do for somebody is convince them, wow, the supernatural is real. And yes, the Bible has very, very good answers to explain the weird or mysterious and supernatural parts of our world. That's why I do that. That's where the passion comes from. If this was just a creature out in the woods, I don't think I would really have the same passion. My passions have before this have historically been really more in other areas. History, I love systematic theology. It's all those paths have led to where I'm at now. One thing has gradually led to the other. But the connection to the biblical and the supernatural, it's why it's important. And when you realize that, and you realize that the Bible is, wow, this is real, that becomes very powerful. And especially if you really, the practical takeaway is, wow, we're living in a cosmic battleground. And who are the players in this battleground? It's Jesus Christ and those on his team. And then on the other team, it's Satan and those on his team. And this is where I want to plug the gospel, because so many people who are oppressed by spiritual darkness, they don't realize that the answer is the Lord Jesus Christ. And the power of prayer in the name of Jesus really does have power over every sort of spiritual oppression, including demons, including stuff that we characterize under the umbrella of UFOs and aliens, even though I don't think they're aliens, or yes, even Sasquatch. And that's a practical takeaway. I'll talk about more about that in just a second. But I want to say this is that the answer is that we need to understand that we are all sinners at enmity with God, in rebellion with God. And the only way to be reconciled to God is belief in the Lord Jesus Christ, that he is the Messiah, that he came to this world and lived a life free of sin and kept the law of God in our place. And then he died on the cross and he was resurrected on the third day. And those who believe in Jesus will not perish in their sins and have everlasting life. And does Sasquatch connect to that in a roundabout way? Absolutely. Because when you understand that we're living in this world, all of these paranormal things are just evidences that, wow, we live in a dark world. There's a spiritual war going on. And when you really understand the implications of that, the state of our souls is even more important than the physical state of our bodies. So that's really where this does get practical. Now, how should that affect the way we live? We should read scripture. We should try to live a life free of sin. We should pray. We should figure out, how can I live a life pleasing to God? And then in reference to how do we live more practically related to this subject, I would say that we just need to have an awareness of it. Not everybody is going to become a Sasquatch scholar. I perfectly understand that, but we should all at least have enough working knowledge to be safe. Big practical takeaway: if you believe there's any credibility to what I'm saying, if you're going to go camping or be in the woods, be careful. I'm not even saying it's necessarily unwise in all circumstances to do it. I do it. But you need to think through that, and you need to pray through that, and you just need to know that there's potential pitfalls. And that's me just trying to be a good friend to people. Hey, I believe this. And if you think I'm a crazy person, then okay, but at least I tried to warn you. And then, yeah, I do believe that prayer has the power to potentially turn this creature away, like other paranormal entities. And because it's physical, I do think things like guns or weapons can serve as a self-defense. I already referenced that with the hunters. There's mystery to this. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I think those are some of the most practical takeaways that I have. And if people want to really, where would people say, Joe, where do I start with this? Obviously, you can read books on Sasquatch. You could read my book. Biblically, I would start with the Genesis 6 stuff. And even simply just looking up who believed that and just reading the text of Genesis chapter 6 and asking yourself the question, what do I think about this? Is it the Sethite view? Is it the supernatural view? That's going to be a good place to start, because you're starting with the Bible. And then if you come to conclusions like I have, then you can ask the next question, does this apply to other things too? So those are just some, that would be some encouragement I would give to just help people just to start praying and thinking through some of these things from a biblical worldview and not from a new age or a secular worldview.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you sharing the gospel, because that really is the crux of everything, is that having that relationship with Jesus Christ and calling upon him in times of trouble. And it reminds me of the significance of the Lord's Prayer, and its simplicity has the phrase, protect me from the evil one. And I can't imagine how many times God has answered that prayer for Christians when they maybe don't even realize the depth of the evil in the world, and how the Lord has just really protected them. And so I believe someday when we are in heaven, that we're going to have a record of all of those times that the Lord answered our prayers that we don't see here on earth. And so I look forward to that.
Amen.
So I appreciate you sharing everything. And I'm going to weigh everything that you've shared. And I think that there's definitely credibility to it. I've learned a lot. And I'm not sure that I'm going to become a Sasquatch scholar, but I'm definitely not going to dismiss someone if they tell me they've had an encounter with a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, or I guess any supernatural being for that matter. So is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have just one more thing. Is this is kind of similar to, and we've talked about, we both believe in, say, cosmology, and we've had rough experiences in the church. I've known some people who have had some experiences like this, and they've tried to talk to people in the church, and they've had some difficulties. And that's why I'm encouraged where the Lord has put me, because it puts me in a really good position to try to minister to Christians too, not just New Age or unbelievers. But really, my encouragement, the reason I'm bringing this up, is there are Christians in churches who have claimed to experience this. And whether you agree with me or not, I would just really encourage, whether it's pastors or people in the pews, to just have a very gracious and humble spirit to listen. I think we should, at the very least, whether we believe in Sasquatch or not, be willing to say spiritual warfare is real or the demonic is real. And I just think that, because if you do have an experience with a Sasquatch and it's frightening, well, that can be very traumatic. Sometimes people really, they need to, it's, I heard one brother say it's like a trauma dump. They really need to talk about this with people. And that's where it gets practical. That's one of the areas where the rubber meets the road. So I just encourage Christians who are hearing this. I'm not saying you got to agree with me. I'm not trying to be Mr. Know-it-all, but just, we need to really have a gentle spirit when we encounter people who have claimed to deal with this stuff.
I really resonate with that. And when I guess it was probably in 2017, my brother came to me and told me that he thought the earth was flat. And I just dismissed him. I didn't want to talk about it. I just said, oh, that's a psyop. That's, just to make Christians look stupid. And my brother died in 2019, and I never had the opportunity to discuss it further with him. And that was because of my own lack of compassion, empathy, concern, and just flippancy towards what other people think or feel. And so it's something that I'm growing in. And that's one of the reasons why I was willing to have this conversation with you today. So thank you so much. Will you please tell the listeners how they can contact you, follow your research, and purchase your book?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And let me say at this point, thank you again for being willing to have me on. I consider it an honor, and it's something that I'm just grateful to be willing to share what I think. I'll start with my book, and then I'll go to my ministry. My book, once again, Apparently the Monsters Are Real, is available on the Amazon store. That's where you can find it. And if you put it into the search box, pretty much everybody's told me they find it pretty easy. Now, if you're having trouble finding it, the link to that is on my website, www.reformedtruther.com. You simply go to the resources. There's a little tab that says Our Books, and you can find all my books there, and it'll send you through the link to the Amazon store. And then, as I've said, my ministry is Reformed Truther Ministries. We really do consider it a ministry. I also have a ministry partner named Hoochie Yang, who is helping me more behind the scenes at this point. But we want to specifically try to help people who are dealing with this. And that is really what we are trying to do at this point, is get the word out that we want people who are dealing with this stuff to be willing to talk to us as Christians. We're not asking for money. We're not trying to, swindle anybody. We don't ask for anything other than just being willing to talk to us. The best way to get in touch with me is through my ministry email, joe@reformedtruther.com. And if you go to my website, www.reformedtruther.com, that contact info is listed there as well. My website is kind of the hub for everything. And you can find links to everything, including my YouTube channel there and my social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. A lot of that's posting my video. I do post on other things as well. If people try to get in touch with me through Facebook or Twitter or through the YouTube comments, I do try my best to answer all of that. It gets a little bit harder because you do get legitimate spammers or fake accounts and stuff. So once again, I'll try, but the best way is my email.
Okay, thank you. And I will include that information in the show notes as well, so that if anyone wants to just make it easy and click, they can get a hold of you. So, or copy and paste, depending on how it goes through. So, okay, well, thank you, Joe. It was great. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Michelle. It's been a lot of fun.